The journey was made possible through the kind courtesy of Captain Jerry Govaya and Roraima Airways. The 914 American citizens, just before they drank Kool-Aid laced with cyanide on November 18, 1978. I'm standing at the Port Kaituma airstrip where 25 years ago U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan was shot dead right at this spot. 25 years ago a GAC twin-otter aircraft was parked exactly where the Roraima Airways plane is parked right now. And as you can see in the photograph, the body of the congressman lying there with others on the ground. That photograph was taken by Captain Jerry Govaya. And Captain Govaya, 25 years ago at this spot, what was going through your mind when you were snapping that camera?
I was a young pilot, and it was a very traumatic experience. But I don't think we understood at a point in time the enormous historical significance and the tragedy for mankind. But it was a traumatic experience for us.
Tell me, from what you can recall, what exactly happened when you got here? From what I understand, the aircraft was facing north. It was about to taxi its way and then for takeoff.
Well, not really. What happened is, first of all, when I got in here, we were the first aircraft that got in here in the morning. I was with the Army at the time, and we got the call and we came in. When we came in, our own Army had just walked in from Matthews Ridge, a 30-mile walk through the jungle, and it came and secured this runway. So when we got here, the bodies were still in the ground. They had a GDF aircraft that was we had a small accident with it with a nose wheel, and it was parked, and the maintenance people were on the far end of the runway, and they were doing the maintenance. So when we got here, our Army had secured the runway, our ground troops, but the bodies were shot, and they were lying exactly where they were shot the night before. And I remember coming out to the aircraft and seeing that. Now, where the GDF aircraft was, we had a tent where the Army was. And in that tent, there were the survivors, people who were shot and wounded from the shooting the afternoon before, but they were kept by the Army and protected throughout the night when we got here. And when we landed, there was a gentleman by the name of Tim Reiteman who wrote one of the most fascinating books on Jonestown called The Raven. And we became very, very good friends over the years. And he came up to the aircraft because we did not know yet the magnitude of what had happened in here. And when we arrived, he put his head into the aircraft and he said, "You guys didn't even walk with a stretcher." And that was a sad moment for me. Let me walk you back through what happened the afternoon before. It was Saturday. It was the Saturday afternoon, and Leo Ryan was just leaving Jonestown. He had left Jonestown, and there was a lot of defectors. A lot of the people who had said that they wanted to leave Jonestown, and that affected Jim Jones very, very badly. And so Leo Ryan came out here to board the aircraft, and they came here, and then there was another vehicle that brought some other people with him. And as they all got out and they started to board the aircraft, so they walked towards the airplane, and they were putting their bags in the plane, and the pilots were doing their pre-flights in the aircraft and so on. And then from the far side of the runway, a tractor appeared on the runway with men armed with machine guns. And they drove all the way here. And the people on this runway were standing watching them as they come, and they figured that maybe they were just coming to terrorize them. They never for one moment imagined the tragedy that was going to be unfold before their eyes. And the vehicle came up, and then the gunmen opened fire. And Tim Reiteman in his book was describing the scene, and he said it was staggering. There were bullets all around him, and there were people falling around him. And he said that he started to run, and he was running into the jungle on the far side of the runway here. And he said as he was running, there were bullets flying on both sides, and he could feel his watch fly off his hands as the one bullet tore his arm apart. And then he said he went airborne. And he went airborne, he said. And he could feel the bullets, and he could see the bullets digging the ground up below him as he went airborne into the bush. And he crawled on his hands and his knees away into the jungle while the shooting continued. And he said he had no time to look back. But the people who actually saw some of this will tell you that the gunmen were in no hurry. They came up and they were going over the people that they shot and were shooting them at point blank into their heads. A lot of the defectors, the congressman was shot, a lot of the photographers were shot. In fact, one video man was shooting the scene of the shooting as it was happening, and he was shot and went down with his camera. and that was a very, very traumatic experience. Now, the unfortunate thing was here is that our own army was on the ground, but the people who were on the ground were mechanics. And even though they were soldiers and they were armed, I think it took them by surprise. It was a very sad moment for our army as well, because our army might have been able to prevent this had our troops maybe been a little more alert to what was happening. But they stood by and watched this unfold, and then the people calmly went back to the tractor, climbed into the tractor, and drove away. And they did say they're going to come back. They did say they're going to come back. At the end of that, there was another small aircraft that was on the runway as well, sitting at the end of the runway to take off. And in that aircraft was one of the gunmen, and he took out his gun and he shot there was another person on the aircraft, a defector, and he shot that defector. And I remember the pilot for that aircraft, he is actually not very sane at the moment. I don't know, he actually became very unstable. But basically what happened was the gunman shot the lady, and then somehow the gunman was apprehended. But the pilots came out of the jungle, because the pilots also disappeared into the jungle that day, and they came back, and I understand that they boarded that small aircraft and went to Jonestown. They're the ones who reported what had happened here along with the police. But the gunmen left very peacefully, and they said that they were going to come back to finish their job, because they knew they did not kill everybody. The congressman's secretary was wounded, some of the other reporters were wounded, and they were all then kept and protected by the army. Now, the army was a very small contingent of 5 men. In Georgetown, we didn't know the magnitude of what happened is, but at the start to unfold, then that night the army, we flew at a 748 with about 30 or 35 men into Matthews Ridge, which is 30 miles away from here, and then the men had to walk through the jungle at night. The reason is that we didn't come to this runway because we did not know, we had no idea of the security of this runway for the night. So the army took them into Matthews Ridge, and our soldiers forced march that night through the jungle, and they got here close to dawn the next day, and then they secured this runway. The next day when we came in fact, I remember I took off from Ogle at about maybe 5:30 in the morning, and as we were flying in here, we could hear the C-5s, the American Air Force and Army was coming in with these C-5s. C-5s are some of the biggest transport airplanes in the world, and they were coming in and they were asking us about the situation and so on. And when we actually got here, we came in very, very high. We flew over here at maybe 5,000-6,000 feet, because we knew that maybe if things were going to heat up, that people might be shooting at this aircraft. And we slowly descended until we recognized that the troops on the ground were ours, and then we landed to the site of what we saw here this morning, which you'll see in the photographs. That was a sad moment, in fact, when we had to now try to start putting the bodies into body bags. And I remember lifting the congressman body and to put him into this body bag to fly him back, because I think it was 5 or 6 people that had died, and we were putting them into the Islander, and we were packing them, and we couldn't get anybody to help us. So the 2 pilots, and then we got maybe 1 or 2, I think, Armenian boys to help us to do it, and because Guyanese people are very superstitious, and so we were putting the bodies into the body bags, and then we took off and we flew those bodies back to Georgetown. And then that is where the drama started, because we came back in that afternoon. This was now the Sunday, and we came back in to basically secure this one. By the time we got back here, we had other helicopters, and we had another twin otter on the ground and so on. We had pilots like Michael Chanasu, who had been taking pictures, and Robbie Roberts and so on. And we had secured this runway, and we were standing here that day and planning now the operation to go into Jonestown that afternoon. Because up to that time we had no idea what had happened to Jonestown. Jonestown is 6 miles away from here. And I remember standing and watching the army officer, his name I think was Lieutenant Colonel Johnson, and he was briefing his men about now the fact that they have to go into Jonestown. And he was telling them as they were preparing to go the afternoon that they didn't know what they were going to find. They didn't know who the enemy was and who the friend was. And so they had to be very careful. But the idea was to go and basically secure and shut Jonestown down on the Guyanese military command.
After talking with Captain Gavaya at the airstrip, we boarded a 4x4 pickup and headed for Jonestown.